There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch, Michael Ryder.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, Bill Cannon, retired NYPD Sergeant with 27 years of service, retired out of Manhattan North Homicide Squad tonight. And I didn't retire tonight, but I'm thinking who we have on the show tonight. We have a special guest tonight, and he's also another retired NYPD Sergeant, but he happens to be a crime scene expert, which is so apropos to the story we're doing tonight, including ballistics. And we welcome Sergeant John Palucci. How you doing tonight, John?
Hey, great. It's great to be with you guys, man. Great.
Feel like to have you back here, and I'm glad you changed your name of your company from Forensics for Free to CSI Experts, because people think they can get your work for free, you know?
Yeah, only for you guys, like I said. Otherwise,
and of course, we have retired NYPD detective and straight out of Brooklyn, Phil Grimaldi. How you doing tonight, Phil?
I'm doing pretty good, Billy. Thanks for not forgetting me.
I wouldn't forget you. Guys, I'm just going to go over what we're going to be covering tonight. And it's sort of taken a long time, But here's the Rust shooting. The weapon in the deadly Rust film set shooting, according to the FBI, could not be fired without pulling the trigger. That was based on FBI forensic testing. Now, I don't know why everyone had to wait for the FBI, because we and several other experts told you that was the facts 9 months ago. But until the FBI puts their stamp of approval on it, I guess no one else believes it. FBI testing of the gun used in the fatal shooting on the movie set of Rust found that the weapon handled by actor Alec Baldwin could not be fired without pulling the trigger while the gun was cocked, according to a newly released forensics report. Baldwin had the gun while rehearsing a scene of the Western film at the Bonanza Creek Ranch in New Mexico in October, when a shot fired, killing cinematographer Helena Hutchins and injuring director Joel Souza. In December, Baldwin told ABC News he never pulled the trigger of the gun that shot Hutchins. The trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger, Baldwin said. The gun fired in testing only one time without having to pull the trigger. When the hammer was pulled back and the gun broke in two different places, attorney Luke Nikas said in an email to CNN. The FBI was unable to fire the gun in any prior test, even when pulling the trigger, because it was in such poor condition. The critical report is the one from the medical examiner, who concluded that this was a tragic accident, Nikas said. This is the third time the New Mexico authorities have found that Alec Baldwin had no authority or knowledge of the allegedly unsafe conditions on the set, that he was told by the person in charge of the safety on the set that the gun was cold and believed the gun was safe, Nikas told CNN. In summary of the post-mortem investigation into Hutchins' death, which was formally signed by the New Mexico chief medical investigator, the cause of death is listed as gunshot wound of the chest, and the manner of death is listed as an accident. That's a little strange. I mean, shouldn't the manner of death be listed as homicide?
Well, I think, Billy, it could be, but they're perceiving, I guess, based on documentation that's probably submitted to the medical examiner, that it was an accident. I'm not so concerned about that. I'm more concerned about the fact that why did it take 10 months for the FBI to do the examination on this gun and come out with this report now? Now, there was a report that I saw on the news earlier talking about how it took so long. They were dragging their feet getting the cell phone records from Alec Baldwin. They didn't hit him with a subpoena right away. They may not even have some of the records as of today, which is completely ridiculous. And the reporter made the statement, and I think it really fits. Not my words. They had no problem with getting a search warrant and going to Mar-a-Lago a few days ago when they thought that there was some, sensitive material at Trump's house. But it took them 10 months to come up with this report. Now, this will be my words. I bet if Donald Trump accidentally shot somebody, they'd examine that gun within the first 24 to 48 hours. So again, what is there politics playing into this because he's a friend of the current administration as opposed to a foe? I don't know if that's going to be the case, but it doesn't seem, and John could probably speak to this. Does it take 10 months to examine a firearm and come up with the conclusion that we came up with, months ago?
That's a great point. That's a great point, Phil. And I think the manner of death is not correct as well. So there's a very, very important distinction to make here. You have two. Everybody talks about accidental discharge, right? You hear that all the time. It's not an accidental discharge if the firearm functions properly, right? Okay, so this, and anybody who's had any training, like I use, real firearms for my training. I teach in front of, a classroom full of people sometimes. If you don't check a firearm 2 or 3 times to make sure that it's not loaded, if you're going to be doing anything that involves, pulling a hammer back or anything like that, there's something wrong with you, right? A lot of times it's, in our world today, it's really not about what was done. It's about who did it. And it's very clear that Mr. Baldwin is getting special treatment here. So an accidental discharge, this is a fully functioning firearm, right? And I'm going to dry fire it. And I don't feel comfortable unless I check it again. Right. So I'm going to pull the trigger. It doesn't hurt revolvers to dry fire them. When I pull this trigger, it's probably about 12, 13 pounds of pressure. It's a lot of pressure to pull this trigger in double action. Okay, this is double action. You pull the trigger, 2 things happen. Hammer goes back, hammer drops. Double action, 2 things. Right. This is single action when I cock the gun. Right. So now when I pull the trigger, 1 thing happens. The hammer drops. Right. Very little pressure to activate that, to pull that trigger and have that hammer fall. But being that this is a fully functioning firearm, all the safety features are intact and working. If I'm teaching in front of a class and for some reason I've got a live cartridge in one of the chambers and I touch, I'm showing them single action, I touch this trigger, which is very light, and I fire it, that's not an accidental discharge. That's an unintentional firing, right? Okay, accident means that it's not functioning properly. So if I have it cocked and say I drop it or I do something, somehow create an impact event or something that causes this defective firearm to discharge around, now that's an accidental discharge. Okay, so that's very important. So you guys know better than I do because you're the ones who wait for that autopsy report and the manner of death to be listed on it. So now, if we've got an accident, that means that the firearm's not functioning. If the firearm is functioning, we have an unintentional discharge, which would fall under probably a criminally negligent homicide, right? But regardless, it's a homicide. It's not an accident. So that's the very important distinction. So we could just start with that one right there,
John, one of the most important things I think that, say, the person that's not familiar with firearms has to understand is that that particular gun, and you just demonstrated it, will not go off unless you pull the trigger. And I know that you've demonstrated on a previous occasion pulling the hammer back, and if you let go with your thumb, it still would not go forward. Because that's another thing that Alec Baldwin could be claiming. Oh, I pulled the hammer back, I let it go, and the gun fired.
Yeah.
But on that gun, that can't happen. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. So that gun is a replica of a Colt. I actually wore pants for this show, right? Which is, unusual for people on these things to wear. So now I've got this. This is a real Colt firearm, right? It's got a single action. It's a single action type of mechanism, right? So we just talked about single action and double action. This is single action. If I have the hammer forward and I'm pulling this trigger, nothing's happening, nothing. Now watch the trigger. When I pull the hammer back, see how the trigger, now it's going to function. It's got some tension on it, and I'm dropping the hammer like that, right? So this gun is designed a couple different ways. So the way it's designed to be drawn in the old cowboy movies is as you're drawing it, see, I'm pulling the hammer back, and then you fire, right? So as you're drawing, you pull the hammer back. That's what a cowboy gun does, these single action Colts, which that was a replica of, right? So let me get back in this chair here. So basically, what happens is when you want to load this, you notice that this doesn't have a swing out cylinder. So this has, you remember these guns, right? You guys came on with revolvers. It has a swing out cylinder, right? So that's how you load it. This cylinder doesn't swing out. You actually have to remove the whole thing if you're going to, if you want to take the cylinder out, especially for cleaning. What it has is this mechanism. It's like a half cock, right? And it's got this loading gate here, right? So you see the chamber in there. You can see the chamber, right? Now,
John, from the half cock position, can that trigger be depressed and cause the hammer to go forward or no?
great point. No, look what I'm doing here, right? I'm pulling this thing. No, and so this is for loading, so you can advance it to the next chamber. It's also for unloading, right? You put this ejector rod. You see it coming out there, right? So you unload it and you load it one chamber at a time through this loading gate. Unless you want to pull the whole cylinder out, that's a whole nother operation, right? So when it's in half cock, that drops the cylinder stop, so it frees the cylinder to spin freely like this, right? Or actually in one direction, it'll spin.
So it accommodates the loading and unloading.
Exactly right. So now look what happens. When I go to pull it further back, it's not going to drop past this half cock, right? This is a functioning firearm. So that's the difference between a single action. This is single action only revolver, and this is single and double action. But the big point is he's got it. Basically, what he had was a Colt replica. Is you have this half cock on here, and I'm not getting past that. If these guns were so easy to discharge accidentally, right, then you'd have a lot of people shooting themselves in the leg, doing these cowboy movies, or even unintentionally letting rounds go, those blanks and stuff like that, whatever they're carrying in the gun. But that's another safety mechanism that's in these things. So if they determine that the firearm's functioning, then he had, at the best, an unintentional discharge and not an accidental discharge, which adds certainly you guys would want to create some sort of at least a reckless, right, a criminally negligent homicide type of charge.
Well, you know something, I'm a little concerned with the fact that they didn't come back with calling this a homicide. And homicide, by definition, just simply means death caused by another. It does not have to be criminal in nature.
Right.
So for them to call this an accident, it seems like the medical examiner and the district attorney are trying to distance themselves from possible criminal charges against those that are found to be negligent in this case. And from what we understand, there was a lot of negligence on this set, and not just with Alec Baldwin. To me, he's numero uno. He's the number one negligent person on this whole set. He pulled the trigger. Now it's confirmed. They got the FBI, it's like the USDA, U.S. Dairy Association stamp. They got the FBI stamp that he pulled the trigger. Now he is confirmed the number one negligent person. All of his crying on ABC with George Snuffleupagus, I didn't pull the trigger, is just total crap. And, I also didn't appreciate the fact that interview seemed to have been so set up to be almost like an infomercial for him to extol his innocence instead of a hardcore interview. And it was even more upsetting to me when the next day George Stephanopoulos went on ABC and said, that was one of the toughest interviews I've ever. I was like, stop. That interview was pathetic. It was such a softball interview that I wanted to call the station and say, are you kidding me?
John, I just want to make one point. Now, you made a really, really good argument for unintentional firing of a firearm and accidental discharge. Now, I know we always categorize it. Let's say a uniformed police officer pulls his gun, begins to struggle with a perpetrator, and he accidentally fires a shot from the gun. He squeezes the trigger. Let's say he falls back and going to keep himself from hitting the ground. He pulls the trigger and the gun goes off. Doesn't hurt anybody. We always refer to that as an accidental discharge. But I think you're making the real strong argument that if the gun is functional, it's not really an accidental discharge. It's more of an unintentional discharge. And the accidental discharge would be if the gun is defective in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, that's correct. So forensically, they had to draw that distinction, right? Because it's easy and it doesn't hurt anything for accident, except when this is a very rare situation. You know, the one that you described, where there's a fight over the firearm and stuff like that. And we used to always write accidental discharge, or a guy even cleaning his gun, right? That was an accidental discharge. But so now, like in the forensic world, we have to make that distinction, because accident means that there's something wrong with the gun, right? Unintentional means you got a fully functioning firearm. What wasn't functioning was the person who actually caused it to discharge.
You know, John, Irish Hewlett in the chat says, indeed, Baldwin is the #1 culpable person, but who had chain of custody of the gun? That is also how a live round got in that firearm is big question number 2. However, pushing it back to Baldwin, he had a duty and a limited care to check that firearm. You don't take someone's word for it. Cold gun, cold gun. It's the actor's job to open up the firearm and make sure that it's a cold gun. And I've spoken to a few actors that told me that, in fact, is how they do it. They never take the word of the person that hands them the firearm that says cold gun. It's like, you know, oh, did you check the gun? Is it unloaded? No, that's your responsibility.
Billy, one of two things has to happen when the armorer hands an actor a gun. And this is by the safety protocols put out by the television and motion picture industry. The protocols are that the armorer checks the gun first, and the armorer either does another second physical check in front of the actor and say, this is the gun I'm handing you. Look, I'm going to open it and show you. Or the actor has the right to do that. Now, we had a broken chain of custody when the assistant director, the assistant director, David Halls, he handed Baldwin the gun without checking it. He said cold gun. So the armorer, I think, is going to be held criminally responsible. The assistant director, as well as Alec Baldwin, with not a homicide charge, but I think there's going to be reckless manslaughter charges here. So the protocols are there. We know that the safety protocols were not, they were very, very loose on the set of this film. The protocols, and the assistant director admitted that he handed the gun, he didn't check it properly, and he should not have been handling the gun. That was his statement when on the day that this happened. So we have 3 breakdowns of safety protocols, and Alec Baldwin, now it has been determined by the FBI, there's no way that gun could have fired without him pulling the trigger. Whether he's lying or whether he's not realizing that he pulled the trigger was depressed on that gun, because when they did the testing, it was fully functional. And as per the demonstration that John just did, it can't fire unless the hammer is pulled back and the trigger is pulled.
Let's hear a little bit from Alec Baldwin here.
I thought there were a number of misconceptions, most of it from sources I really wouldn't concern myself about, but a couple that I did concern myself about, where there were these authoritative statements about, this is what happened. The sheriff's department hasn't even released a report to the DA yet. The reason I wanted to sit down with you is because I really feel like I can't wait for that process to end in February, March. I mean, I'm not asking them to speed it up for my benefit. That's ridiculous. But I am saying that they're going to do what they need to do. And I wanted to come to talk to you to say that I would go to any lengths to undo what happened. I would go to any lengths to undo what happened.
I think the big question, and the one you must have asked yourself 1,000 times, how could this have happened?
Well, there's 2 things I want to say about that. One is that when I talk about this, my concern is that I don't sound like I'm the victim, because there is a victim. There's a woman who died. And my friend got shot. He's my friend. And she was a new friend. I met her and we worked together on some of the mapping out of what we're going to do on the film, which, in the movie terms, if you go make a movie with Scorsese, you and the DP don't sit down and they solicit your ideas of how to make the film. You know what I mean? In the case of Helena, we sat down collaboratively and talked a lot about what we wanted to do in that a precious amount of time we had. But I want to make sure that I don't come across like I'm the victim, because we have two victims here. And the second thing is that all of what happened on that day leading up to this event was precipitated on one idea, and that is that Helena and I had something profound in common. And that is, we both assumed the gun was empty, other than those, dummy rounds.
You never assume, because you make an ass of you and me. You learn that when you're an 8-year-old kid.
I want to get into more detail on the day in a minute, but let's take a step back. What was it that drew you to this project in the first place, to Rust?
I'd worked on a project with Joel before.
Joel Souza, the director.
Right. He did this movie, Crown Vic, that I produced. And Joel and I stayed in touch. We're friends, and I loved Rust. He said, I want to send you this. And I read it, and I said, I love it. I love it.
Rust, a low-budget Western, tells the story of an aging outlaw on the run with his young grandson. Baldwin, the film's star, is also one of the producers.
Very excited. Very, so excited that we finally got this made, because every independent film has many false starts, and when it finally goes, you feel like a plane. When you finally get some lift under your wings, it's very, very gratifying. I am a purely creative producer. My authorities as a producer are casting and script, which are actually married to the role of being a lead actor in a film.
So you're not the kind of producer who's looking at the line item of each budget.
No. There are basically two types of producers who are really in charge of production: people that raise the money and the people who spend the money. My consultations or approvals were completely about casting and about the script. I don't hire anybody in the crew.
Not even the cinematographer, no one?
No, but he will apprise me of what he's doing. And he'll say to me, I got Helena Hutchins to be the DP. I said, how do you feel about that? Are you excited? I'm very excited. She's wonderful.
What did you know about Helena Hutchins before she started working on this?
I knew nothing about her until Joel said to me, I got her. She was fantastic.
Helena Hutchins.
One of the things that, and if you're not familiar with this story, Alec Baldwin was one of the producers of this movie. And producers have come with it certain responsibilities. If you noticed in the interview, he was trying to distance himself from all responsibilities to do with safety and with staffing and all that other stuff. He was just had to do with the artistic part of the production. I had nothing to do with anything that could potentially come back on me and cause a lawsuit.
Billy, on-location producers have an added responsibility to protect the safety of the crew. That's like a gimme. That's just something that's assumed and we don't want to assume, but it's basically part of when you're an on-location producer, that's your responsibility. You have to be the one that's in charge of safety, and you're responsible for it.
And apparently this set was a disaster, as told by many of the people that worked. As far as safety, it was a total disaster. It was a disaster as far as the people weren't getting paid. Many people quit during the first week because their accommodation, like that's all union stuff. But the safety stuff is all stuff that has to be taken into consideration.
They were playing fast and loose with a lot of the safety regulations, obviously.
Praised by many in the industry, was a trailblazer in the field historically dominated by men.
Make sure we don't see people walking around like walking.
The Ukrainian-born cinematographer quickly gelled with Baldwin.
The people who watched The Daily said that her work was beautiful. She was someone who was loved by everyone who worked with and liked by everyone who worked with and admired.
Get the Academy here. Get that Oscar ready.
Sorry. But admired by everybody who worked with her.
Rust's 21-day production began filming on October 6th at the Bonanza Creek Ranch, just outside Santa Fe, New Mexico. The ranch has long been a favorite location for filming westerns.
We need a place to lay low.
Things have a way of escalating out here in the West, with one thing leading to another.
The day that I flew there, they'd been shooting for a week already. I come the following week on the 11th. That night of the 11th, I had dinner with Helena and Joel. And we talked about some of the compositions I was thinking of to...
That was the first time you met?
First time I met Helena, yeah.
What was your first impression?
When I met her, I knew she had that spark.
This
I
training.
want to
course
get
you-
to the point where he shows himself pointing the gun and swears that he never pulled the trigger. I think it might be at this point.
do it. What did she tell you?
She said things like, remember, this is a blank round, so you have to create the discharge yourself because there's no projectile. So if you shot the gun, you go bang. When we roll the camera, you got to go bang and have the gun snap back. You have to create that. She would give you little tips about firing. And she'd say to you, when we're done, point the gun down. When we're done, you give the gun to me or to Halls, only those two people.
Dave Halls was Rust's assistant director, also known as the first AD. Seen here in this IMDb photo, he was responsible for keeping the production on schedule.
Sometimes we would be on a set that was a very, very cramped set, and they wanted people in that room on an as-needed basis. But if I'm holding the gun and they say cut, I then hand the gun to Halls if she's not there.
Yeah, why Halls, not Hannah? Some people have said that only the armorer should be handling
No.
it.
That's inaccurate. Meaning in the protocols of the business, meaning Hannah would to hand me the gun 99% of the time, whatever, the preponderance of the time. But when we would say cut, if Hannah was away from the set, I would hand Halls the gun.
Hannah Gutierrez Reed had a dual role on set, armorer, and she was also the assistant prop master for the film. One of the things her attorney has said is that she was hired for 2 positions on the film and therefore was stretched in an inappropriate way. Did she raise any of those concerns with you?
No, I assume that everyone who's shooting a lower budget film is stretched, myself included. And I got no complaints from her or the prop department. I'm not sitting there when I'm getting dressed and ready to go do a scene saying, oh my God, the prop woman seemed very harried today. I didn't get a sense of that from any of the people on the film. The first time I heard that there was any problem with anybody in the crew of the film was when Luber said, well, we have some issues here.
Lane Looper, the first camera assistant, would email production managers a resignation letter later that night, citing safety concerns. Quote, during the filming of gunfights on this job, things are often played very fast and loose. So far, there have been 2 accidental weapons discharges. He also wrote about concerns about reasonable rest and housing for local crew with long commutes to the set.
When he quit, now the day before that happened, we wrapped. And he came up to me and he said, thank you for the position you've taken on behalf of IATSE and the union on social media. I said, my pleasure.
This photo, posted by Helena, showed the cast and crew in solidarity with IATSE, the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, which had been on the verge of a strike. And Alec posted this on Instagram.
And I want to say to the people in IATSE, do what you need to do. You want to go on strike? Go on strike. Because I'll tell you something about the executives. They don't give a about you. He said, because we have some issues here. I said, such as? And he said, my men need a better hotel room. There was no mention of safety issues.
He didn't say anything about the accidental discharges on set?
He didn't say anything about anything. He goes, my men need better hotel rooms. I said, well, we're leaving, we're wrapping. Will you be here tomorrow? He said, yes. Because what I was about to do, which I've done on any number of films and TV projects, was to give more of my salary back to the production to pay for X. And I was about to say to him, let me know what it would be.
He's such a working class hero.
To be you guys in a house that's closer to how we can address your problem. I will be happy to contribute to that. The next day they were gone.
So you had no sense from anyone on the set that people had been stretched to the point where safety was compromised?
No. I never heard one word about that. No.
You think maybe Stephanopoulos should have asked him about that letter then? You didn't know about the letter that he wrote, that there was safety issues? This is an experienced journalist that's like throwing him not just softballs, but beach balls.
None.
There's a ton
Plus,
of,
producers told ABC News Mr. Looper's allegations around budget and safety are patently false, which is not surprising, considering his job was to be a camera operator and he had absolutely nothing to do with or knowledge of safety protocols or budgets. Safety is always the number one priority on our films.
When people say cutting costs, I don't say this with any judgment or any cynicism. Spielberg wants to save money. Tom Cruise wants to save money. Everybody who makes movies has a responsibility not to be reckless and careless with the money that you're given. You know, those are men who make movies that cost $205 million. And I'm making movies that cost $5 million or
The question, though, is were costs being cut at the expense of safety and security?
In my opinion, no, because I did not observe any safety or security issues at all in the time I was there.
Thursday, October 21st, Baldwin posts a photo of himself in costume on Instagram. Back to in-person at the office. Blimey, it's exhausting. That morning, Looper and 6 other crew members walked off the set. Filming continued with a replacement camera crew. Scene 118 in the church was slated for after lunch.
Everybody there was having a positive experience. People who are watching the show, people who are back home, you have no idea how unique an environment a motion picture set is. It's kind of, there's an instant familiarity. The amount of care, these are people who are professionals who have really good jobs in a field they love. And I looked at all these people and I see how hard they work. They're so hardworking and they're so conscientious. And you're around people and you're part of one of the great collaborative processes in the world, movie making. Everyone moving like a watch to get everything done. And when you kind of, I don't make that many movies anymore because movie making demanded that I travel and I didn't want to leave my family. All these movies I made, I stayed home. I didn't want to go. If I went away for a week. To leave my family for 4 weeks and go shoot this movie, that was a big deal. And I'm sitting on this pew. And so help me God. I sat on that pew right before they called lunch. And I said, this movie has made me love making movies again. Because I used to love to make movies. I did. You know, I worked with people once. I was going to do the movie The Edge. And they called me and said they got Tony Hopkins to do the film. What do you make of it?
Yeah, looking for you here.
And I started sobbing. I just started sobbing because I thought, oh God, I'm going to have a chance to work with this guy. Any chance you could go easy on me? When they cast me in It's Complicated with Meryl, I thought, I'm going to get to go make a movie with her.
All right, it's getting a little sickening with that. We're getting a little off
He's
topic.
sounding like a victim, isn't he? Sounding
Well, yeah, no, he's also like trying to it's like an infomercial for him to take blame off of him. Alec, you pulled the trigger and killed Helena Hutchins. Let's get back to that, you know? And it's just, and Snuffleupagus there is just letting him go wherever he wants. It's like, you know, John, one of the things that, again, that most people want to know is how the hell did that live round or live rounds, plural, get on this movie set?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I'm not sure what their protocols are. I was reading a little bit up on it, and they have like different types of cartridges that they use. One is like a blank, where it's got some sort of powder. You have a primer to initiate the powder, and then you don't have anything that looks like a bullet at the end of the cartridge, right? So this is actually I believe it's a 45 Colt. So this is a cartridge case, right? So on top of the cartridge case goes a bullet, and then in the back you have a primer. So the firing pin strikes the primer. The primer is explosive. Gunpowder is not explosive. It burns rapidly, right? So but the primer has explosive because it has to be initiated upon impact, right? So the primer ignites the powder. The powder burns. There's a bullet that's crimped into the edge of this cartridge case, and that's when the pressure builds up, and then the bullet will be discharged down the barrel, right? So some of these will have. So now, if you're looking down, you know, if I'm pointing a gun at you, you can see that there's no cartridges in this chamber, right? So I'm doing everything backwards here. You can see there's no cartridges. You can see these guns that these chambers are empty, right? So some cartridges they have sort of an effect where it's like a dummy bullet on top of it, right? So this is a complete cartridge, right? So you have the case and you have the bullet, you have the primer, and you can see the difference between these two primers. This one has a dent in it because it's been fired, right? And this one doesn't. So if you look down if you look at the cylinder, right, you can see that you can see this one has what looks like a bullet at the end of it. So they make some sort of a blank that gives you that appearance. So if somebody's, if the camera is looking down where it can see the chambers of the firearm, it's not showing you an empty space. So that was another type of cartridge, and they have color codes, and they have, like, some of them have a hole actually in the side of the cartridge. I'm going on memory, so this might not be 100% accurate, but that's basically the gist of it, right? I think there should be another, so your question, Bill, was what are live rounds doing on that set? And the answer has to be they shouldn't be allowed on that set at all, right? I took a course with former ATF agents all about different types of firearms and their mechanisms, how they operate. And these are all police officers, right? So we're very used to carrying guns. We're used to unloading guns. We're used to pointing them at things at the range. We're used to understanding that the business end of this gun is a whole, like when I do, I was just doing some experiments, some research, and I tell everybody, I said, imagine that this is a wall, right? And you never want to be anywhere in front of this wall. You're not allowed to be anywhere in front of that wall, right? These are these things that are ingrained in our heads. So police officers taking this course with ATF agents, you have a bunch of people that are very familiar and very comfortable handling firearms. So that doesn't mean mistakes aren't made. So when I took this course, you could have your firearm with you, but the ammunition source had to be removed, not only removed, but not in your pocket or anywhere. You were not allowed to have live ammunition in this course that's full of professionals. Now, I heard Baldwin say he's got some training, right? These guys, they use all the wrong nomenclature. What's their training like? Our training is far superior, but here we are barred from having live ammunition in this classroom. So, and there's a classroom. It's not a big set where people could be off there. I heard that they were plinking, right? Like shooting cans or something like that with these.
Yeah.
So somebody knows that there's live ammo on the thing. And how does that, so there, when he said lunch, I'm thinking liquid lunch, right? And so this whole thing takes place after lunch. I would really be interested in what happened during that lunchtime. I mean, that's probably where everything went sideways for this whole thing, right? These are movie people, right? They're, not strangers to intoxicants, so
John, can I make a point about
Yeah.
You showed how they do this a lot of times in the movies with the revolver. They get a close-up shot of a revolver, and they want to show that what looks like that there's a live round in the chamber, in the chambers of the revolver. Now, Steve Gardell, when he was on, who's retired from the movie TV unit, now works on productions, told us that when they use that type of round, there's no primer in it. There's no gunpowder in it. And the way that they can discern whether or not it's a live round or it's a dummy round that's used for just the effect to show that it looks like there's a round inside the cylinder of the gun is there's a BB inside the gun. So they would physically take it out and show the actor, this is not a live round, and shake it. If you hear that BB moving around inside the shell casing, you know that there's no gunpowder inside, and obviously there's no primer. So that what they'll do is they'll put that particular type of round into the firearm so that it'll appear in the chambers that from a movie standpoint, a camera standpoint, that it looks like there's a real set of bullets in the gun. So that's one of the things. And then they do have the other types of rounds, which are a gun that'll fire blanks, which is a full charge, but there's no projectile on it. It has the primer as well as the gunpowder. It's a limited amount of gunpowder. It's not a full charge. And then you have bullets that have just a primer, where I think Baldwin was talking about that, where you have to create the kickback of
Yeah.
the gun.
Yeah,
So
recoil
those are the three different types that they use they're supposed to be using. And then Steve Gardell also told us that in New York, they're not allowed to use a live fire gun, a gun that can actually fire a projectile. What they do is they take a live gun and they put a piece of steel, they weld a piece of steel inside the barrel. So that way, even if a live round does get in one of the chambers, it's not able to fire.
That's interesting. Yeah. And that's, you know,
I mean, that should be protocol across the whole country
Yeah.
in the movie business.
I agree. And those are really important things to know about. I mean, like you said, so if they take the primer out, right? When I open this, I don't have anything in here, this loading gate, but you would see actually the head stamp or the bottom part, right? This is like the head stamp where the primer is, the
Right.
base of the cartridge case, right? So you would see that, right? So now if somebody hands you a gun, first of all, you never take anybody's word for stuff like that, right? I mean, I feel I'm so like you saw. I just put I put a live round into one of these chambers, right? And I'm checking this thing constantly before I even close a cylinder. These are just things that you do. I mean, how could you have any sort of sense of safety and responsibility?
John, let me make a quick point about that. Could you hold up the revolver again with it closed, with the cylinder closed?
Yeah.
Okay. Just looking at that, you can only see 4 of the 6 chambers. 2 are blocked by, I guess, the barrel side and underneath the barrel. So you need to open that gun and look inside those cylinders to make sure that those chambers are empty. Correct.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
again, listen, it's supposed to be done several times before they say action on the set of a film. They didn't follow those protocols. And I think all 3 of those people, Baldwin, the AD, and the armorer, are all responsible for the death.
Yeah. I think
Donna,
so.
Donna Lehman in the chat asks, bottom line, will or should Baldwin be charged with a crime? In my opinion, and my opinion doesn't matter at all, I think he should be charged with either manslaughter or criminally negligent homicide. I believe it was an accident, but should he be charged? I believe yes. Should he go to jail or prison? No, I don't believe he should, but I think he should be charged because this is a serious matter. This was gross negligence. Will he be charged? It's 9 months already. What are they waiting for to pull this trigger? Metaphorically, pull the trigger of indictment. What is this district attorney waiting for? This happened on October 21st, 2021. Phil, what do you think? You think he should be charged, and will he?
I do believe that he should be charged, as well as the armorer and the AD that handed him the gun. But I was watching news accounts of the latest breaking details earlier today, and there was a lawyer that was on, a talking head from cable news, and he said potentially, now I don't agree with this, but he said potentially Alec Baldwin could be charged with obstruction of governmental administration for obstructing by lying, saying that he didn't pull the trigger. Now, I think that it could be construed that perhaps he didn't realize he pulled the trigger in the moment. So I don't think that that would ever stand. I don't think he's going to get charged with that. But I do think he's culpable for, as you said, reckless manslaughter, criminally negligent homicide, and everyone that had their hands on that gun that day or was responsible for the care and safety of that gun should be charged. This woman lost her life, and it's unnecessary. It shouldn't have happened.
Yeah,
John, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think this is one of those things, man, where you start with a little bit of BS and then it snowballs, right? So if this guy had the decency, now you see that interview, how much post-production went into that before it made it to the air? But while he's talking and putting his head in his hands, there's music playing. Come on, you're trying to evoke
sympathize
for this guy.
Yeah.
Right? So it's completely a one-sided operation. That is also a production. That's not an interview. This is an interview, right? So I mean, if we did this 3 hours ago, and as I'm talking, you start playing that dramatic music, or maybe the theme to Jaws or something, and I can, right. So that's a drama. That's not an interview. And for him to go out there, and I think what really makes this, like disgraceful is the fact that he comes out with all this BS that can easily be proved through forensic testing. And Phil, I remember there was a 2-part question you asked me in the beginning. One was about the speed of an operability test, right? It's very, and you guys remember when we had high profile cases, they'd get bumped to the front of the line, right? That's just how it was. I mean, our firearms analysis guys, which is formerly the ballistics unit, those guys are overwhelmed. They're completely overwhelmed. They, if you have a case that's this high profile and they get a gun, they say this guy's saying that he didn't pull the trigger. They could tell you in you know, if you want to have it your work checked, you could, you know, within half an hour, you can have 2 examiners say this gun is fully functioning. It's fully functioning firearm. Whatever he tells you about not pulling the trigger is BS, right? So now if he had been grown up enough to say, you know what, yeah, you know, I could understand him passing the buck a little bit to the people who had the firearm before him, right?
Sure.
Because that is a problem. Somebody hands you a gun that's loaded with a live cartridge on a movie set. That's a really big problem, right? So, and you know, maybe he's worried about civil liability. I don't think he's too worried about the fact that he killed somebody as much as he is about you know, where he's going to live if it comes out that he knew he pulled the trigger, right? But in the beginning, to come out with all this BS that a simple operability test of the firearm is going to shatter, right? It's one of those things. And you know, right now we live in a world where you can be in a bubble and only hear what you want to hear. So people who love Alec Baldwin, they're going to have people that are going to tell you all kinds of stories about how he's got no blame, you know, whatsoever. So he puts the story out there. He's going to have people that support it. They're going to find talking heads with, you know, biased opinions that are going to, you know, make something up that could be helpful for him and stuff like that. But the truth is going to come out of the laboratory. That's the whole point with this stuff. I mean, if you look.
Well, John, you know what many people always say is that the science is what's going to prove whether he pulled the trigger or not, and that's what is presented, the science. So his word going against the science really virtually means nothing.
It should, you know, and it's funny that word kind of gives you well, agita right now when you hear science. You can't go against the science, right? So it's like, yeah, you know, that's been
that's the argument. That's the argument. But in this instance, the science is proving
this is provable science, I think.
Right, that someone pulled the trigger.
Yeah, and John, let me ask you this, John. From your experience, since you are an expert in the field, how many times do you think that they fired this gun? You think, you know, roughly, could we say a couple of dozen times that they fired it or less?
Yeah, I don't know. That's actually a really good question. Here's the thing, and you had mentioned that there might have been, after they did their testing, there might have been some sort of malfunction, right? These guns you ever see in the old westerns, and I'll do this because you know it's important. So I'm checking real quick, make sure that all these chambers are empty, right? So basically, what happens is, you know, the old westerns, right? So you have the guy that fans the gun, right? And these guns can be fanned like that, right? So what that is, you know, so when you draw the gun, right? You draw this thing, and as you're drawing it, you're pulling the hammer back, and that's how these guys shoot it in the old west. There's another thing that they do is you can hold the trigger like this, and you can pull the hammer back and it'll drop because the trigger's depressed. You're right, and it'll fire every time I do this, right? So that's called fanning, and I think that if you have, you know, it's like that's why you don't buy a rental car, you know, because people are beating on it, right? This is nobody's gun. This gun belongs to the movie company or whoever it belongs to. And if you fan it, you can fan it like that. But you're putting a lot of undue stress on parts. This gun was not made to be fanned like that. So, but sometimes, like, because I use this gun for demonstrative work like we're doing now, and I have a little range here, and I've done that to show people that you can fan the gun like that, right? So, of course, if these guys are out there playing around with live cartridges, don't you think somebody's going to want to do that you've seen in all the questions?
You know, the big thing on this case, and there's still a lot of unanswered questions. To me, the big unanswered question is, again, why hasn't the district attorney filed charges yet? And why has no one been indicted yet It's been over 9 months. The information's come back from the FBI that someone did pull the trigger. There's been some gross negligence on the set. Is the district attorney going to let this case just become like drop the criminal case and just let the civil case be the justice in this case?
Well, can you charge somebody when the manner of death is accidental?
I've never heard that before in my life.
Right.
Coming out of a medical examiner's office, because it's accidental. Where does that come from?
Right, and they would have to wait for. It's like one of the other things that we would rush through in New York City was suicide cases. Right, the guy shoots himself. There's a bullet in him. There's a gun on the crime scene. Right, you guys have been through this dozens of times, I'm sure. You got to match that bullet to that firearm. Right, so those go to the front of the line. Right, so the medical examiner is waiting for those results to put his manner of death on the report, right? Because if the bullet that's inside the dead guy didn't get fired from the gun that's on the scene, that's the only gun that's on the scene, we got to, as Henry Lee said, something wrong, So seriously, something's wrong. So he's going to need, for him to declare that this is an accident, he's going to need a report that says the firearm wasn't functioning properly, and that's the only way this could have been an accident.
Yeah, I mean, that to me, that's baffling. I just want to put a little bit of Matthew Hutchins on the screen because this was important to show how he felt. This is the husband of Halyna Hutchins, how he felt in regards to this case and this investigation.
And was just looking for a way through the storm.
Did he seem distraught during that time?
There were a lot of emotions for sure on both sides.
Hutchins, who's filed a civil suit against Baldwin and other producers and crew members on the film, now expressing outrage with Baldwin's recent interview, where he says the actor shifted blame over the death of his wife, Halyna.
I feel that someone is responsible for what happened, and I can't say who that is, but I know it's not me.
But watching him, I just felt so angry, just so angry to see him talk about her death so publicly in such a detailed way, and then to not accept any responsibility after having just described killing her.
He said essentially he felt grief but no guilt.
Almost sounds like he was the victim. And hearing him blame Halyna in the interview and shift responsibility to others and seeing him cry about it, I just feel like, are we really supposed to feel bad about you, Mr. Baldwin?
So do you think that the majority of the blame lays on Alec Baldwin?
The idea that the person holding the gun, causing it to discharge, is not responsible is absurd to me. Every individual who touches a firearm has a responsibility for gun safety. But gun safety was not the only problem on that set. There were a number of industry standards that were not practiced, and there's multiple responsible parties.
The suit, which alleges at least 15 safety practices were disregarded on set, claims there was a wider culture of cost-cutting that ultimately led to Halyna's death. In a statement, Baldwin's attorney says any claim that Alec was reckless is entirely false. In your mind's eye, what does justice look like?
We're pursuing justice every way we can, with the lawsuit seeking to hold accountable the people who are responsible for Halyna's death, which was totally preventable. In the end, justice won't bring Halyna back, but maybe the memory of her can help keep people safe and prevent something like this from ever happening again.
The American Film Institute, AFI, where Halyna received a graduate degree in cinematography, established a scholarship in her honor. You feel her spirit in here at AFI?
Oh, she spent many hours here.
Yeah.
So, folks, as you can see, the big thing is going to be the civil suit. And many people in the chat are asking who loaded the gun. It's got to either be the armorer, Ms. Gutierrez, or it could be the assistant director.
AD.
So it's either one or the other of those. So they are certainly going to be considered for liability and maybe even a criminal charge. As we said, we don't know what's on this district attorney's mind, especially when it came back from the medical examiner's office, rather than that this was a homicide, this was an accident. I've never, ever heard a medical examiner come back with that this was a homicide. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. If you're not subscribed to us, please go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, give us a thumbs up. And we also have a Patreon if you want to support us. We have 3 different levels. And we also have a YouTube channel memberships, which you could become part of our little club we have. The folks in the green font, they're members of our YouTube channel, and they help support and pay for Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. You know, John, I find, I mean, your presentation was fascinating. It gives you, you know, I always have that saying in my mind that was drilled into me at the range is, make sure your gun is empty, do a physical and visual inspection. And I always, that's one of those things that is just, it's almost like, to a squat, move, and right away that brings you back to
Nobody
the
knows
police
what
academy.
that is, but we know.
Right? No one else would know what the hell we're talking about it. But if someone says to a squat, move, you know what the hell that means because you're in the police academy for 6 months, and that's you knew you were going to do push-ups or some other exercise. And
that's 40 years ago for me. It sounds like it was yesterday.
Right, exactly. And that whole thing at the range, do a physical and a visual inspection will stay with me for the rest of my life.
I got to grab another prop for that one. So that's so essentially the physical inspection. So that's more for geared towards a semi-automatic, right? So so a physical inspection, right? We do a visual. So when we open this up, sometimes a cartridge. So this is over here. This is actually a fake gun, right? This is what they call an inert firearm. It never was a firearm, but it's a pretty good replica. And over here you'd have an extractor, right, which catches the groove on the cartridge and extracts the discharge cartridge case, right? So you know, so an extractor. So when you drop, the way we would unload, you drop the magazine, right, and then you would you know, you pull the slide back, and you always want to rack the slide numerous times, right? There's always a chance that something's not functioning properly with this extractor, and there could still be a cartridge that's in the chamber, right? And so the chamber on this is at the end of the barrel. So the physical inspection is stick your finger in there. Is there a hole there, or is there something flat? If there's something flat, there's something wrong, right? So there could still be a cartridge in there. So that's your physical inspection. With the revolver, like when we had revolvers, it's very easy. It's very easy to see that this is empty, right? Very easy to see. This one, not so much, right? For me to take this thing apart, it's a whole process. You know, I gotta pull this pin out of here. I gotta have the gate, loading gate open up, and then I can take this out and I can look at the cylinder, right? But you're not going to do that every single time. You're going to want to go, you know, kind of click through and make sure that each chamber is empty. It's a lot more of a cumbersome task to verify that this is an unloaded firearm, a single action firearm like this one, than it is with the revolvers that we used to carry, right? And also with a semi-automatic like we just saw. But the whole thing is, you have to have that mindset. You can't be so complacent. Like, first of all, why did the gun have to be loaded with anything? This wasn't even a live shot, right? This was a rehearsal. Why in the world does it have to be loaded with anything, right? And then for him to say that he didn't, even after he fired it, he thought maybe she passed out or something. He didn't even say something like that. Like he still didn't know that he had shot.
He acted like she went down and he thought she fainted. He wasn't sure that she was shot. Bullshit.
Yeah. So you know, so we got all that. But the whole thing is, this is another one of my little displays here. Let me see if I can get it where you can see it pretty good. This is where am I? This is a 45 Colt. That's a big piece of lead right there. You know, that's when that, so now basically, so that goes into the barrel, right? the lead is filling the lands and grooves, or it might have a jacket on it, right? So that's where all your pressure is coming. There's always a little bit of the gases that escape before the bullet leaves. If you ever see a slow motion of a gun being fired, you look at the muzzle, you'll see some of the gases coming out, and then the bullet comes out. But then behind that, that's where all the pressure is. So you have all that pressure building up when you have a bullet that's in the barrel, right? So when that bullet leaves the barrel, you have significantly more recoil. So if you're used to firing blanks on a set and you shoot that thing and you have no idea that something other than a blank was in there, something's wrong, right?
He didn't have to create the recoil with that round.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. And you know what? Maybe if you were just firing live cartridges during lunch, it wouldn't have hit you that was a live round in there. So you know what I mean? So, but anyway, so this is pretty cool. If you look, you can see that this is the 45 over here. I hate doing stuff backwards, man. And if you look at it compared to these other rounds, it's a big sucker. You know, that thing. The only other thing is this is a 50 caliber over here, right? But that's a big piece of lead, man. That's a big piece of lead. That's a very very powerful cartridge. That's going to give quite a bit of recoil, and it's going to do quite a bit of damage. As we saw, it completely perforated her body and then penetrated another person.
Right, entered the shoulder of Joel Souza. Yeah.
So, you know, for him to play that whole act of he had no idea that this was a live round that went off, then you know, something's wrong once again, you know.
Exactly. Phil, I want you to go to a quick commercial here.
Joe Murray, attorney at law. Have you found yourself in a jam? Are you in need of legal counsel in the New York area? Do you need a victim's advocate? Well, Joe Murray is your man. He's not only an experienced trial attorney, he's also a retired 15-year member of the NYPD. He literally knows both sides of defense. His website is jmurray-law.com. His telephone number is 646-838-1702, or you could email Joe at jmurray-law.com. And if you would like to advertise on Police Off the Cuff real crime stories, you can email us at policeoffthecuff, 1 at gmail.com. That's policeoffthecuff, 1 at gmail.com. Our rates are very reasonable, and we have a national as well as an international audience.
You know, I guess, you know, John, your presentation was fascinating.
Excellent.
As usual.
Really,
and
really
I'm
excellent.
glad you graduated from forensics for free to forensics where you get paid, CSI Experts Incorporated. And, you know, there's still a lot of questions here. And to us, to trained law enforcement, and I'm baffled as to why there has, if you're not going to charge anybody, let everyone know. All right, let people know. No, there's going to be no charges. We felt it was an accident. But I feel it was an accident too, but I just feel there was such gross negligence on this set that you can't ignore that as a district attorney and just say, oh, okay, we're going to let the civil case take over and the civil case punish the people that did wrong and caused this shooting. But, you know, Miss Gutierrez, the armorer, she has no money. They're not going to sue her. David Halls, he probably has no money either. The only one with deep pockets is Alec Baldwin.
Well, you know what, Billy? There's also the insurance that they take out when they do a production. So I really feel, though, that, you know, Baldwin can say he didn't pull the trigger. They could say the gun was operable. We know that already. We called that a long time ago. But had they followed the necessary safety protocols and taken the round out, and they, you know, even though it was rehearsal, say, we're going to use what looks like a real round and shake it and say, wait a second, there's no BB in here. Had Baldwin done that before either the AD or the armorer handed him the gun, it was the AD that handed him the gun. Had he done that, so everyone across the line failed to follow the safety protocols, which led to this woman's death. And I feel it's criminally responsible as well as civilly. I think the civil suit is going to be a slam dunk, but there definitely needs to be criminal charges. Even if there's no jail time, it needs to be criminally responsible. They need to be held. So that way we set a standard for the industry throughout the country. We've had a lot of these shootings. On this particular movie, there were 2 or 3 other, we'll call them inadvertent shootings, accidental shootings, whatever you want to call them, but shots were fired. So bottom line is that they need to set the standard.
Iris Hewlett, she did not need to die, but for protocol violations and Baldwin not verifying It was a cold gun before pulling the trigger. Can't be an accident unless gun is proven to be defective. Very good, Iris. John Palucci is going to give you 100 on the end of semester test here.
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, look, we covered this case a lot in the very beginning, and look, when someone does something wrong and they're going to be held either criminally liable or civilly liable, of course they start making up stories and providing a defense for themselves. And even he's doing it in the media, which is, look, we learned from being police officers and from studying the law, the best thing to do is to shut your mouth and keep it shut. You talking on social media or on TV, it's not helping your cause. Just keep your mouth shut. That helps your cause.
He would look a lot less narcissistic and a lot less like a fool had he kept his mouth shut and just showed some sympathy and compassion and taken some responsibility. That woman is not going to be at the dinner table tonight with her son and her husband. She's gone forever. And, there was some Twitter, whatever it was, some type of social media where his wife was basically saying, oh, woe is me. My husband, hasn't he gone through enough? Well, I think that the family that lost their loved one is going through something terrible. And Bill, I agree with you. Had he kept his mouth shut, this would be being looked at in a different eye, so to speak. Whether or not there's going to be criminal charges still remains to be determined. I feel, and I think we're unanimous, we all feel there should be criminal charges just based on all of the flagrant violations of the safety protocols.
Absolutely. John, do you have any last words?
Yeah, no, those are all good points. And like you said, I think that him running his mouth like that was the worst thing that he could have done, But like I said, there's going to be people that can still stay in that bubble. Look, he said this, and then this expert from out of nowhere said this. It's like since I retired, I probably had 100 cases. I've only written a few reports, and I've only testified a few times because a lot of what you find is not always helpful, right, to the case, right? Forensics is about finding the truth. That's all it's about. And you'll see labs, maybe there's some guy that's a real despicable character, and if that fingerprint could match this fingerprint, we would put this guy away. But you know what? These guys, they're out to find the truth. That's where we all got to be. We all got to look at this thing a certain way and say, listen, this guy went out there to create this illusion, right? And didn't he say this was the other thing too that I'm thinking about is you pointed a gun, loaded or unloaded, at a human being, right? And we don't do that. Like, we don't point unloaded guns. Like when I'm in front of a class and I know I have checked this gun 10 times and I might have even clicked my way through all of the chambers, and I know that there's no way this gun's going to fire, I still will not point it at a person in the class. You don't do that, right? We're in I think in this electronic era, I can't see. Didn't he say something like, she was like, oh yeah, no, point it at me, right? Did he say something like that? I remember we watched something like that.
Yeah,
like,
self-serving statement to get
Yeah,
the onus off him. But John, I got to tell you something. When you were pointing that gun at your camera and it was pointing at me, I was feeling uncomfortable with that. So
I feel uncomfortable doing that. Yeah,
absolutely. That's because we have ingrained in our brain safety from the first day that you get to the firing range. Everything's about safety, and that feeling is not a good feeling having that gun pointed at you.
Yeah, no, exactly.
John, even
I checked it too.
Even like the thousands of people we've arrested or in arrest-oriented situations, and you've pointed your gun at them. Your finger wasn't on the trigger.
Right.
We were trained that also. Like, you don't put your finger on that trigger unless the shit is on. You know what I mean? Because you could be startled, and if your finger's on the trigger, you could accidentally pull the trigger. And you don't, again, that's, I guess, an accidental discharge, according to the John Palucci CSI expert thing.
Unintentional firing.
Oh, an unintentional. So, okay,
yeah,
I failed.
Look,
I had one question and I failed.
Yeah. Iris got you beat, man. There's another thing, what they call sympathetic response, right? So like, in the heat of the moment, there's so much stuff going on, right? Our memories are, what they call flashbulb memory, right? You you go into a mode where you resort back to your training. If you train really well to have your finger not on the trigger, that's one thing. But if it gets to the point where we're at a threat level, like if you're holding a guy, right? So here's one of the things. Let's see if I can get both my hands in the picture. You're holding a guy, right? You ever had that with a perp and he's got his hands in his pocket and you're like, shit, this guy could come out with a gun and whack me. And so now you're like, get that hand out of your pocket, get that hand out of your pocket. If you get to the point where it's like, now your finger's on the trigger because you think like, I might have to shoot this guy, right? There's what they call a sympathetic response. For every bit of pressure I'm putting on him with this hand to hold him, I'm sympathetically starting to
squeezing. Yeah, yes.
You know what I mean? And that isn't, you didn't mean it to happen. So it's unintentional.
That's really unintentional. That's
right.
Well, it's almost like what they call, John, it's almost like what they call contagious shooting. And we've seen that at the range where they would say, all right, fire 3 rounds on the whistle. And someone, boom, and the next thing you know, boom, 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 boom. Everyone starts shooting because they heard the one guy shoot.
Yeah.
And that's called contagious shooting. And I guess that could happen in the street too, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that happens. Yeah, there's been some cases like that. I think the Diallo case might have been that might have been something that was raised. So the question for me is like, you have a manner of death that's an accident on a death certificate. Can you still charge somebody, right? And would you give a police officer the same courtesy you're giving Alec Baldwin?
I doubt it.
I just early on in a few years ago, there was a California police officer who shot and killed a perp. And Alec Baldwin said, I wonder what it feels like to wrongfully kill somebody. The California officer was cleared. The shooting was found within department guidelines and I just felt like, here's this guy giving his asinine opinion. And I wonder how he now feels what it's like to wrongfully kill somebody. Old what goes around comes around syndrome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a terrible situation to be in. And I got to tell you the truth, Alec Baldwin is as narcissist as he is. I don't think he should go to jail for 20 years based on this. I think in his heart of hearts, it was an accident, but it was caused by flagrantly violating safety protocols.
Bill, I 100% agree with you. I do not like Alec Baldwin. I do not think he should go to jail. I think this was an accident. However, I think he is liable because he pulled the trigger and that's been proven, and look, I don't think he will go to prison. I think he's going to part with some dead presidents from his personal stash in the civil suit. But we're
calling for accountability, Billy. That's all. We just want accountability in this case. And I think the family of Helena Hutchins feels the same way. They want some justice. They want accountability for what happened. That woman should not have gone to work on that day and died. Period. End of story.
No way. So guys, we covered this pretty damn well, I think. We obviously have our opinions and sometimes they squeak out maybe where they shouldn't, but this is not ABC News or CNN. This is Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. So folks, I want to wish everyone a great night and thank you so much for tuning in. John, always great to have you as a guest, and Phil, have a great night.
Thank you so much, John, and everybody out there, stay safe.
One episode just ain't enough.